Hello, I'm Shelling, and this is Dead Island Definitive Collection. And yes, you're probably thinking, oh no, not another Ultimate Remastered edition of yet another game that I didn't need. Or perhaps you're just thinking it's another cash grab. Well, I made a short video with some of my thoughts on this a few days ago. Some of you may have seen it, where I talked about whether or not a graphical upgrade for a game I'd already played would be incentive enough for me to purchase and play it again, and especially whether or not it's worth purchasing over Dying Light for those who haven't played it. Now, at this stage, I hadn't yet got my hands on the game, but over the last few days I've spent a little bit of time playing the game, and quite honestly I'm surprised at how much it changes the overall feel and smoothness of the original experience. Now, before I get into the specifics, I want to say that I bought the original Dead Island when it was originally released in 2011, and I have 115 hours in the game. I also bought Riptide when that was released, but I ended up not finishing it because I guess I'd played too much Dead Island at that stage, and I kind of burned myself out on that, I suppose. But over the past weekend, I've been playing the original again with two of my friends, as well as spending a fair amount of time with the new version. To put it simply, I can't go back. Each time I play the new version, I'm reminded of how clunky the original plays in comparison. The original was good when it came out, and in fact was one of my favorite zombie titles of the time, but of course it was always very clunky and never felt like a smooth experience, even when the frame rate was at a solid 60. It always felt like there was stuttering, and if you wanted to play the original game, you had to use something called Dead Island Helper, a configuration tool which reduced the stutter, prevented certain crashes, and aided you with certain graphical settings and that kind of thing. And it dealt with a number of other crashes and oddities that were present in the game, as well as getting your hardware to use the game more effectively, which I noticed when I was doing some hardware testing yesterday. Now, thankfully, this is not necessary with the definitive version. The new version uses the latest version of the Chrome engine, version 6 I believe, the same as Dying Light Enhanced Edition. And it feels smoother. It uses the multi-core CPUs more effectively, and it uses my GPU way more effectively as well, partially due to some of the new graphical features, I'm sure. Now, I loaded up the game on my wife's PC, a Core 2 Duo with 2.1 GHz CPU and a GTX 670, and I got an average of around 45 frames a second on max detail at 1680 by 1050, which was actually quite a surprise. I didn't expect it to perform in that sort of realm, and to be honest, it seemed to scale very well. And all in all, this is just really a better version and better experience than the vanilla. So if you haven't played Dead Island, this is for sure the version you should be getting to save yourself some headaches. So in my previous video that I made about the game, as I said, I didn't think that a graphical upgrade would be enough incentive for me to play the game again. But after some hours with it, I have to say it seems like it's more than just a graphical upgrade. The game just feels better in every single way to play, and is actually making me consider playing through it again. So if you're wondering what some of the changes in the new version are, the textures are high quality. There is a new photorealistic lighting system in place. It uses physically based shading. There's anti-aliasing, improved models and geometry assets in the game, as well as a new and improved UI. So yes, the game does look better for the most part. However, the water seems to be simpler in the new version. It doesn't seem as reflective and realistic looking as in the previous version, and it seems they've also toned down the physics a lot with regard to objects in the environment that were interactable before and now are not. For instance, you can't kick zombies' heads around or the beach ball and that kind of thing. Although in the previous one, the physics were a little bit wonky with these things anyway. So for me, these things are relatively minor in comparison to the things that have been added. Now, if we take a look at the graphic settings compared to the original, we can see that it's looking more similar to the Dying Light options than the original Dead Island options. So there are indeed more options to choose from here. Now, that's not to say there aren't any issues with this particular game. The UI has been redesigned to some extent. The menus are a little easier to navigate, or at least see, and the skill trees aren't obscured by the descriptions of skills like they were in the original game. The quest text is also much clearer when you accept quests and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, it does still feel somewhat cumbersome to navigate all the menus and sell items, and especially to equip items. And I really do wish that they'd worked a little more on making these parts easier and more intuitive to use. I mean, aside from the clunky controls in the original game, the menus were probably my second biggest gripe with the game. And unfortunately, those menu issues are still present, albeit a little bit improved. But at least I suppose that the clunkiness of the controls seems to have been greatly improved. Look, I mean, of course, it is an old game and there is only so much that they can change. So I'm not going to say the game isn't clunky anymore, but it's a large degree better than it was before, but not quite on the Dying Light level. However, I did get a kind of a strange issue with my Razer Naga, where I had keyboard keys mouse to my Razer Naga buttons that didn't work correctly in Dead Island. For example, F is the use key and Q is my kick key, and if I press the mouse button that's mapped to F, it sometimes kicks. Why? I don't know. And if I press the mouse button mapped to escape, it sometimes just drops my weapon for no apparent reason, as if it's the backspace key, because that is what my drop weapon is mapped to. So I'm not sure why I had this happen. I wish I knew. I've never had any of these kinds of oddities in any of my other games with my Razer Synapse software, so perhaps it's an incompatibility with my Razer Synapse software and this particular title. Although the strange thing is, when I loaded up Dead Island Riptide, everything worked perfectly. So this problem was specific to Dead Island Definitive Edition. Although I do have to note this happened with Dead Island Vanilla as well when I was playing over this weekend, so I'm not sure what is up with that exactly. And also there is no FOV option. So yeah, I guess folks are going to have to mod that in. I know that the FOV could be changed in the original via the configuration tool, so it obviously can be changed. So I'm not actually sure why they didn't add this into the definitive version of the game. It is 2016 after all. Another odd thing I did find is that the blood of the infected that you kill is overly shiny. It almost appears silver at times. It is possible that this is some kind of a rendering bug. Hopefully this is the case, because it does look a little bit strange. But honestly, outside of those complaints, in the time that I've spent with the game so far, this still is the best version of the Dead Island games that there is. So if you own Dead Island, you can upgrade to the Definitive Edition with an 85% discount. I'm not sure if this is a time thing. It doesn't list it as a time thing, but it may well be. And likewise, if you own Dead Island Riptide, you can also get 85% off of that. And if you own both games, you can get the Definitive Collection for 85% off. And then if you do that, you'll get the bonus of, I believe it's called Retro Rampage, which I haven't played, so I can't really talk too much about that. But otherwise, it works out to about $3 each or $6 for the entire collection. And honestly, I think it's well worth it. However, I will say though, if you haven't played any of the Dead Island games or Dying Light, I'd highly recommend getting Dying Light Edition instead, since I feel that is a better and more polished product overall. Which is not to say that Dead Island is bad, it's just I think that Dead Dying Light is better. There are more game mechanics involved, the controls are less clunky, the game just feels more polished in every respect. However, if you have played Dying Light and not Dead Island, and you're looking for somewhat of a similar experience, then I would recommend that you pick up Dead Island Definitive Edition. And if you didn't enjoy Dying Light, then you probably won't enjoy Dead Island either. But for those of you who don't know what Dead Island is, if the footage isn't enough to give you an idea, it's a first-person zombie game with a focus on melee combat. There are ranged weapons as well. You can buy or find a variety of weapons that can be added, can be modded at least, with elemental damage amongst other things. There are a number of things that can be looted throughout the environment that will be used to craft these modifications and various grenades and that kind of thing. You'll also find blueprints as you progress through the game. There are 4 main characters to choose from in Dead Island. And there's an additional one in Riptide, each with their own strengths and focuses. So you've got Xian, who is an expert with bladed weapons, Sam, who is an expert with blunt weapons, Logan, who specializes in throwing weapons, and Perna, who is essentially a gun expert, I suppose. Now, each of these characters have 3 skill trees that they can focus on. Each of these characters' trees are different enough, though, so that for the most part, it'll add a degree of replayability to the game. All the characters play relatively differently. Yes, you are still bashing zombies over the head or cutting their limbs off, but they all do provide somewhat of a slightly different experience. And otherwise, the world that you're playing in is a semi-open world game. There are side quests, there's main story quest, and some repeatable quests that are all scattered throughout the 4 zones, at least in Dead Island. And the zones themselves and the introduction of new enemies keeps the game mostly interesting throughout the 40 or so hour experience. That's how long it took me, at least, to get through the original game. Doing some side quests and some exploration, and I wasn't actually rushing through any of it. Riptide is basically more of Dead Island, with a different location and different zones, and of course a new story. There are some new defend mechanics where you hold off against hordes of zombies, but for the most part it remains pretty much the same as the original Dead Island. And of course both Dead Island and Dead Island Riptide can be played co-op online with friends or random people. Now, both of these games are good, in my opinion, and do offer a good zombie hacking experience. Quite a unique zombie hacking experience, actually. There aren't really any games, well, of course, aside from Dying Light, that do anything quite like it. Otherwise, I suppose there's not really that much else to say. As I said, this is not a full review of Dead Island or Riptide, since both games were released a few years ago, and there are plenty of reviews around if you guys are wanting to check those out. I did mainly want to talk about what was new in this version and whether or not I thought it was worth the upgrade. And contrary to what I said in my previous video, after having actually played this now, I must say that I do think it absolutely is worth the upgrade. It's a great zombie experience and definitely the best version of Dead Island that you should get. But I would say that if you really have to choose between Dead Island Definitive Collection and Dying Light Enhanced Edition, I'd probably recommend Dying Light Enhanced Edition, since I think that was a better overall experience. But other than that, I was pleasantly surprised by this release, and I definitely didn't feel like this was a lazy cash grab. This is well priced, cheap enough for those who already own the game, and I think it's got a good amount of content for those of you who don't own the game, if you enjoy the gameplay loop that exists. But anyway guys, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you would like to support the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like and share, since it really does help me out a lot. Otherwise, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the section below. I've been Charlie. Until next time.